The ancient civilization of China developed over a period of 3,700 years. Interestingly, in spite of its enormous geographical size and huge population, for most of its history, China had little contact with people from the other great civilizations of Asia, even less with people from the great civilizations of Europe, almost none with people from the civilizations of Africa, and none at all with people from the civilizations on the distant continents of North and South America. This was due to the fact that huge mountains, enormous deserts, and the Pacific Ocean encircled China. And the Chinese even constructed a great wall to help stop foreign invaders. As a result, Chinese civilization developed largely on its own, without major influences from the outside world. Its unique civilization thrived in part because Chinese emperors established unusual and effective methods of governing, while Chinese philosophers and religious leaders helped to develop guidelines for proper behavior that promoted social harmony and strong families. And all of these things came together to create an amazing civilization that has endured throughout the ages. China's capital cities were of utmost importance because they were where the emperors lived and directed the activities of government. In order better to understand the civilization of China, it is fascinating to see how life was and still is lived in the old capital of Xi'an and the new capital of Beijing. 1,300 years ago, the population of Xi'an, seen here in modern times, exceeded 1 million people, which made it one of the largest cities in the world back then. Like other important Chinese cities, Xi'an was surrounded by tall, extremely thick walls, and it possessed a defensive, water-filled moat for added protection from invading armies. The cities of ancient China could only be entered by passing through city gates like the one seen here. Soldiers guarded these entrances, and they patrolled the walls as well. The gates were located in each of the city's 4 walls, and they opened to the 4 directions: north, south, east, and west. From the gates, wide straight streets crossed the city in a grid pattern. At the center of Xi'an, where the 4 roads from the main gates meet, a huge bell tower stands. At dawn each day in Chinese cities, the city bell was rung like a sort of ancient alarm clock to signal that the gates were opening. And at dusk, a large drum would sound from a nearby drum tower to signal that the gates were closing for the day. Here we see the 700-year-old drum tower of Beijing. And this is Beijing's incredible bell tower. From high up in this tower, where the city's huge bell is located, it is possible to look down upon a typical old Chinese neighborhood. This is a place with narrow streets lined with small traditional houses where ordinary families have lived for centuries, and where it is still common to find 5 generations living happily together. In China, elderly people are the most highly respected members of society. And in public squares, it is quite typical to find groups of older people at their leisure, playing board games and cards, while nearby, their grandchildren amuse themselves with colorful kites. For the ancient art of kite flying is one of the most common forms of recreation in China. The biggest holiday in China is the Lunar New Year's Festival, and it is probably the celebration the Chinese people love the most, because it is a time for fireworks, for music, for dragons, and it is the time when teams of lion dancers like these don brilliant costumes and charge through the streets to drive the previous year's evil spirits out of the neighborhood. Besides their traditional festivals and forms of relaxation, the Chinese have long enjoyed many traditional types of food as well. For example, stuffed steamed dumplings of many different shapes and sizes are a very popular favorite. The Chinese also love to eat noodles. In fact, they invented them. And it is not unusual to see people mysteriously making noodles by hand. The open markets found in the Chinese cities of today are good places to learn about some interesting Chinese eating habits. For they are places where farmers and fishermen come to sell the things they have raised or caught, and where city people come to buy them. Here you not only find colorful vegetables and an amazing array of mushrooms, but also all kinds of meat, including the meat of dogs and cats, and the meat of far more exotic animals too. Because the Chinese expect the raw materials they use in cooking to be as fresh as possible, you will always find all sorts of live creatures for sale in the markets as well. Creatures such as crabs, frogs, turtles, snakes, and even the large larvae of certain insects, because all of these things can end up as ingredients in traditional Chinese cooking. The emperors of China led quite different lives from the people who visited the public food markets each day. For many centuries, the emperors of China were the most powerful men on earth. That was because they ruled over what was, and still is, the world's most populous country. By way of comparison, back in the 1790s, when China's population stood at 350 million people, that of the United States, which had just formed as a nation, was around 3,500,000 people, a mere 1/100th of China's population. And at the same time, Europe's most populous country, France, had about 20 million citizens, less than 6% of China's population. The emperors of China were known as the sons of heaven, because they were believed to have been divinely chosen to serve as a link between the gods in heaven and the people on earth. Because of their extremely exalted social position, the emperors rarely walked anywhere. Instead, they were carried about in palanquins, portable chairs like this one. The Chinese emperors chose their successors from among their many sons, selecting the one they thought could do the best job. For even though these rulers possessed almost limitless power and wealth, the emperor's role in Chinese society was an extremely difficult one. In the capital city of Beijing, the emperors and their extended families lived in a vast complex of imperial buildings known as the Forbidden City. And by visiting it, we can greatly improve our understanding of how the emperors of China lived many centuries ago. To begin with, every aspect of the design of the Forbidden City and of the government administration that it housed was based on the ideals of the great Chinese philosopher Confucius. Construction began here in the year 1420, and when it was finished, this complex of buildings had nearly 9,000 rooms, and each day, roughly 80,000 people could be found either working or living here. In the old days, ordinary people were not allowed to enter the Forbidden City, but now anyone that can afford the price of admission can do so. Today, the journey into the Forbidden City begins here at the Tiananmen Gate, or the Gate of Heavenly Peace. For over 6 centuries, the emperors of China came to this gate to make important public pronouncements. And it was also from here, back in 1949, that communist leader Mao Zedong, whose portrait adorns the gate, officially declared the birth of the People's Republic of China. On the other side of the Gate of Heavenly Peace is a large courtyard. This courtyard extends out from the imposing, heavily fortified Meridian Gate. Historically, this was the main entrance to the Forbidden City because the Meridian Gate is the south gate, the direction the Chinese associate with masculinity and power. Naturally, this gate's central doorway was for the use of the emperor alone. On the other side of this doorway is another huge courtyard. Through it flows a small stream called the Golden Water River that is crossed by 5 stone bridges. Each bridge represents a different Chinese virtue. For example, the virtue of intelligence or the virtue of courtesy. On the other side of the Golden Water River, visitors pass by some big metal pots that once stored water for fighting fires. After that, they are greeted by a pair of large bronze lions that symbolize imperial power. These lions acted as doorkeepers to ward off evil spirits and stood at the foot of another gate, the Gate of Supreme Harmony. Passing through this gate, imperial visitors entered the largest of the inner courtyards. Across this courtyard is where the first of the 3 great palaces of harmony is located. These palaces were the most important buildings in the Forbidden City, and they are slightly higher than any of the other buildings. The largest palace seen here, called the Palace of Supreme Harmony, was where the emperors were married, celebrated their birthdays, and announced the names of those who had passed the imperial examinations. During most such great events, the emperor sat inside the palace on this throne, while bands of court musicians played amazing music to entertain him. Behind the Palace of Supreme Harmony are the 2 other palaces of harmony. Inside the smaller one, the Palace of Middle Harmony, the emperor sat on this throne when he met with high officials and performed certain ceremonies. The last of the 3 great palaces is called the Palace of Preserving Harmony. Inside this palace, the emperor sat on this throne and oversaw the final stages of the imperial examinations. These tests were extremely difficult, but for those who passed them, a lifetime job in the emperor's government was all but guaranteed to them. And the man with the highest score was honored by being invited to stand on the head of this statue. After descending from the raised area where the 3 great palaces are located, another, much smaller gate, the Gate of Heavenly Purity, is reached, where 2 more statues of lions stand guard. The area beyond this gate was strictly off-limits even to the most privileged visitors, because this was where the emperor actually lived. Chinese emperors had lots of children and lots of wives, and the emperor's highest-ranking wife received the title of empress. On the other side of the wall from where the emperor and empress lived are the imperial gardens. This park-like area is filled with trees, unusual rocks, and several small buildings constructed for the enjoyment of the emperor and his family. And beyond the gardens, it is possible to exit the Forbidden City through its northern, feminine gate, the Gate of Divine Prowess, and return once again to the world of ordinary human beings. True or false? China was never very isolated from the other great civilizations of the world. True or false? In ancient China, the activities that took place in the bell and drum towers were related to the time of day. True or false? Elderly people have traditionally been treated with great respect in China. True or false? For centuries, the emperors of China were the most powerful rulers on earth. True or false? In ancient China, imperial examinations had to be passed in order to obtain a job in the emperor's government.